This is Paul Nobles from eatform.com, and I am sitting here with the Trap Queen, April Blackford. April, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
April was just telling me how her third world internet in North Carolina doesn't work all that well, and she was trying to explain to me that Google Chrome is not going to be on the internet anymore. And
No, I said they weren't going to support my awesome MacBook.
I also have a MacBook, but you don't see me quaking in my shoes the way that the Trap Queen is. So I actually was out of town doing a marketing conference, and so everybody has kind of seen all the videos that we made, and we were having a great time, and it was kind of fun. How did the week work out for you, April?
It went very well. The seminar or the chat went very well.
So you went and visited one of the gyms. We were a participant at the World of the War of Wads in North Carolina, but it got snowed out, and we had various relationships with gyms in North Carolina. And April lives in Fayetteville, and she's moving to Raleigh. How far is Raleigh from your house?
Like less than an hour.
Okay, and so the gym that you did a presentation in was in Raleigh, right?
Yeah, it was kind of in Garner, so it was a little bit outside of Raleigh towards me. So it's not far at all.
So you said something really interesting. We're actually not going to, get super into the stories that we typically do at the beginning of the shows, because we've got a lot of topics to cover. But what I wanted to see, because you said something that was sort of interesting, and I think that people need to hear it, because you sent a message to these guys because you sat there and answered questions for them, and you were like, you guys have it mostly figured out, right? And I mean, can you just expound upon that a little bit? Because I think that's the way. What I think happens for a lot of people is they want a very specific result in a very short period of time. And what they don't realize is that the things that they're doing is actually working. And if they saw those things through and then just kind of like, made some minor tweaks to their major plans, they'd have a much better shot at reaching their goals than if they constantly resort to like the extremes.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing that I would say is that a lot of people were stressed over getting the macros perfectly. Over I can't seem to get my food right, things like that. The biggest thing was, their averages looked great. It was, just like I told them in the chat, I said, I've been doing this for 6 years, and I think I've only had 3 days that my macros were like spot on perfect. When you have those days, it's kind of like, oh my God, how'd that happen? So you're not striving to get zeros across the board where everything evens out. That was the big thing. Another thing was, for the most part, I'd say almost all of them, except for maybe one or two who really, really jumped into the calories without actually talking to someone. Weight was very stable. There was one guy that, he's been doing it for 5 weeks, and he was, kind of confused that he's only lost 5 pounds. And I was like, dude, it's freaking awesome. Where are you coming from? And then when he told me, which was a low carb paleo background, I said, that's exceptional results. That's great considering you're eating more food and so forth. And then of course I touched on the subject, and I asked him, I said, I'm sure everyone here has done Whole30. Yes, of course. And I asked him, I said, how much weight did you lose? He's like, he said, well, I probably lost about 15 pounds. I said, well, how much did you gain back when you stopped? He's like, all of it. I was like, exactly. I was like, there you go. I said, you've already lost 5 pounds. You're losing a pound a week. I said, why would you want to lose a massive amount of weight and then just regain it all back once you start eating an appropriate amount of food? So the big thing was that a lot of stressing, and I actually touch on this a lot in the fundamentals classes that I do on Tuesday, that, you get a lot of scared fairly new people who, they're kind of stressing over little minor things rather than just looking at the big picture and trying to work on progress with that.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a great point. And I'm gonna kind of just take a break here for a second just to talk a little bit about, because we have a lot of people that are listening to the podcast now. I think last week we had like 12,000 people, had no idea that many people were listening to this. And so, when you look at Eat to Perform, or you think about signing up to Eat to Perform, basically what happens is we have kind of like these 2-month challenges. And what we're trying to do is get you guys to establish a baseline, right? And so once you establish that baseline, then we can work off of the numbers that you have in place. And ultimately, kind of like what the guy mentioning, the 5 pounds lost, when you're losing 5 pounds and you are staying good in the gym and your workouts are good and things of that nature, not only are you potentially losing fat, but you're potentially gaining muscle in that process by addressing some deficiencies and things of that nature. And so that's a big part of kind of what we're talking about, because I think what happens for a lot of people is they want to deal with everything all at once. And what we're showing over and over again with thousands of people getting the success is that, and I've always said this, if we could show people that our way is vastly better, I have faith in people. I have faith in people that they will come, right? If they see their friend Marge working out in the gym, killing it, still reaching her body composition goals, they're going to be very intrigued. And then, of course, eating an adequate amount of food for what you do, you're always going to feel better in the gym. But in general, I think people think that they have gigantic problems, and oftentimes they have smaller problems than they think. The other thing that I think is sort of interesting to the discussion is the fact that when we're talking about, kind of like the way that we set up challenges, it's not the same way as other people do. And the reason why we do it that way is sort of based on levels of excitement. And, we have like amazing prizes. I mean, we've just given away, like this week, I think we're giving away Beats by Dre headphones, like the earphones for like when you're running and stuff like that. Can you not hear me, or you do not know what I'm talking about?
Some of those.
So April wants to quit, and now she wants to have a chance at winning these prizes. But we, like we did Fitbit Surge and a scale 1 week, Vitamix 1 week. What we really want people to do is be excited about, the whole process. And if we can kind of keep people excited, I think ultimately we can show them that a way that includes some level of patience and understanding and forgiveness. Because I think what happens is that you go through a period like, through the holidays or work stress or something of this nature, and you might gain 5 to 10 pounds in that process, and you always assume the worst. And it's sort of like the rabbit or the hare scenario, right? Where, everyone kind of wants to do the rabbit thing, but really the hare or the turtle approach. So everybody wants to do the hare approach, right? But really the turtle approach ends up being better and actually shows you better results long term. And so we'll talk about that. And, once again, at the beginning of each of our challenges is when we start to set up people's performance-focused fat loss. If you're not familiar with performance-focused fat loss, we're about to talk about it for about an hour. And what performance-focused fat loss does is you're trying to keep a level of performance and volume while reaching your fat loss goals. And the way that it differs from your typical cutting methods, April referenced Whole30, Weight Watchers, The Wrong Living, all these types of places, typically what you're going to do is you're going to be very limited in the way that you're going to view food. Now, those ways can be used as a deficit. Like, for instance, we're not necessarily anti-paleo or, we could actually help you do Weight Watchers fine, right? But you can't do Eat to Perform and then do it their way, because ultimately you're going to resort to some level of misunderstanding. And what's interesting about what April was saying with the guy that gained all the way back, the reason why he gained all the way back is because he didn't really know why it worked. That's really the most important thing, and that's why we want people to establish a baseline. Once you have a baseline, okay, now, I'm just going to be very clear about this. I don't count calories, right? And some people, they feel more comfortable doing it. Like April counts virtually every single day, but she's not, meticulous about it to where it's like this rigid thing that rules her life. And that's the way we think it works best. But if your ultimate goal is to not count calories, trust me, I don't do that. But when you're trying to get a specific goal and you're trying to see what works, you're going to have some level of introspection. So every time I cut, and I always wimp out, April, when it comes to doing a cut, but I think I may end up doing it in March just because, we've been doing these podcasts. And so I want to walk people through it. And then also I've kind of been, working on hypertrophy cycles and strength building for the last, almost a year now. And so it might be time to bite the bullet. I'm not 100% into it, but I would, normally I would like to make up for it in volume. And so I may try to kind of juxtapose those two different things and then talk about that process over the course of 8 weeks. So I'm not 100% invested that I'm going to PFFL, but I think I might, right? So the big one that is, well, I'm trying to think of what we should start with. And I think that, why don't we start with Gradually Awesome? Because I think that, well, you know what? Let's start with a 2-week mini cut. Because I think that, we did an article on 2-week mini cut. I'll add it to the show notes so you guys can take a look at that. But once again, when you have an established baseline, this is what happens for most people, okay? They start off in terms of, a deficit way of eating, and then they just go as drastic as they can while still functioning in the world, right? And we believe that the opposite is the approach, and which is why, the guy being down 5 pounds would be frustrated because he wants to lose 30 pounds, right? And break in the monster truck voice and all that other type of stuff. But, if we really look at what truly works in the end, it always comes down to some level of patience. So in the case of a mini cut, the goal of a mini cut is to eat at a deficit. Really what you're trying to do is, most people know that the first couple of weeks you're really kind of dealing with water, and you'll often see, 5 to 6 pounds lost, and you're kind of dealing with water. That's my guess is, what our friend, in North Carolina is experiencing. And then when you are eating an adequate amount of food for what you do, or at least close to it, ultimately you're going to, it's not going to be as dramatic. So let's say that as a male, I'll use myself as an example, and I'm not going to put, out crazy numbers, but typically, I'm eating more than 3,000 calories a day. And you go, well, how do you know that? Because you don't count your calories. Well, I know that because I do count my calories occasionally. I do have a good understanding of what my meals look like. And unlike April, I kind of eat the same things all the time, you know, and I'm not making an argument for that. Okay, I do believe that people should have a bit more variety, but at the same point, it's what worked for me. It makes things convenient, and then I can have a good idea on what my overall levels are. But so let's say that my baseline is roughly 2,700. Essentially, if I was 2,200, I'd be looking at roughly 3,500 calorie deficit over the course of 2 weeks. In theory, I'd be looking at 2 pounds of fat loss, or 2 pounds of fat loss. The math there is basically 500 calories a day, 3,500 kcals equals 1 pound. So a lot of people use that calculation in terms of structuring deficit cycles for athletes, for human beings, right, in general. Like when you go to a calculator online, this is the formula that they're using for you. Here's the problem with that formula. One, if you're eating less. Two, you're eating less, say, carbohydrates. It can affect that dramatically. So now you lose 7 pounds, right, over the course of 2 weeks. And you're like, wow, this 2-week mini cut is like a dream, And actually, you can get a little bit more extreme on 2-week mini cuts just because, so like for myself, I might actually go down to something like 2,000 calories, which would give me roughly 3.5 pounds worth of, potential fat loss. The problem with any cutting cycle is that you're not always dealing with fat. Some level of water, some level of fat, and sometimes that will end up being muscle. Usually over the course of about 2 weeks, you're really not looking at actual muscle atrophy as much as you're looking at muscle hydration. So it's very common to walk through a body fat test in that scenario and see, oh my goodness, I lost 3 pounds of muscle there. You didn't really lose 3 pounds of muscle. That muscle was just hydrated differently, and that's through glucose levels. But I also believe that it's just through hydrated fibers. Now, it's one of these things that you talk to the PhD types, and they don't want to give you a definitive answer there. All I'm saying is anecdotally, we've had many clients where they've kind of walked through kind of these cycles. When we talk about dehydration, a lot of times people think we're talking about water. We're not. We're really talking about hydration as it relates to carbohydrates, giving you full muscles that have more potential to do better work, right? And so that's probably the big thing. But the long story short, and once again, I mean, if we can't finish everything, I'm going to try and finish everything tonight, but if I can't, we'll carry it over to Thursday. But in general, here's the idea with the 2-week mini cut. 2-week mini cut is not, for someone, with a lot of fat to use. You're really just trying to kind of reset your system. A great example would be, you've got kind of a a great example would be triathlete or like a CrossFit Games person. They have the open end of February, but in the case of November, December, maybe they overdid it a little bit. So, end of December, early January, they might do like a mini cut just to kind of straighten things out a little bit. The last thing I want to say, and this actually will apply to all scenarios, is that the more volume that you can have in your training, I heard something really good I mean, the coaches course, which by the way are also available on this podcast. For some reason I can't get people to rate and review us, but I'm going to work on that next week. Um, because we have a lot of people listening to it, and they're clearly very interested in the content, but nobody's willing to step up and say, "Hey, we're really liking all this new content you guys are putting out." So if you could do that, I would really appreciate it, because apparently iTunes, that matters to iTunes greatly. So Greg Nuckols, I can't remember what Greg's site is, but if you Google Greg Nuckols, it's Nuckols. He's really kind of smart, geeky, nerdy guy, and just understands exercise physiology in a unique way. And I loved listening to his podcast that he did for us, last week. But what he said was, and this should be in every single gym in the world. It should be a gigantic banner, and if I can help it, I might be the one putting those banners. But what he was saying was, if you're looking for muscle and keeping muscle, the priority is volume. If you're looking for strength, the answer is intensity. And what he means by that is, when you are trying to add new tissue to your frame or keep the tissue that you have to have longer rep sets and things of that nature. When you are trying to get stronger, it's going to have to be sort of hard, and because of that, you're going to have to compromise volume. So when we're talking about being in a cutting cycle, we're really not looking for a lot of intensity. Really looking for more volume, or at least as much volume as you can put in. Now, a lot of people will say, well, it's hard to put in volume when I'm not eating an adequate amount for what I do. Yes, that is actually the case. And that's one of the reasons why we're saying that dieting is actually part of the problem, or a bigger part of the problem, and not so much the solution, which is why we're trying to have you not dieting most of the time, and then only gradually working towards a deficit occasionally. So volume is key in these scenarios. If you normally work out, 5 days, and you're doing like a 2-week cut, maybe going down to 4 days, but some of that volume, I would say some level of low intensity, steady state work, walking, hiking, jogging can sort of help kind of these deficit levels and help your 2-week cuts be successful. Anything that I missed there, April, or anything that you want to add? Because, for you guys, what you need to know is that we're talking to people on a daily basis, right? We're having these discussions with people. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want you guys to be doing things smarter, but I also want to let you guys know that we're a resource for you guys, in this regard. And we, whether it's quick start, whether it's group coaching, these are upgrades where you get a level of support. And think about all those times that you've sort of been alone, and you don't really know, what to do. I mean, you could certainly set up these deficits on your own and things of that nature, but is that really the problem, right? Is that really the issue? Is the numbers? Because, for most people, it's not the numbers that's been a problem. It's like walking through, should I work out this day because I only slept 4 hours, last week, and I'm cutting, right? And that's just one example of a myriad of topics that we talk to people about on a daily basis that allows them to fail more successfully. That's probably the best way to say it, because most people think that a really rigid way of thinking of things is the best approach. And the way that we think of it is that failure lights the path of ultimate success. So April.
I guess some people can't be trusted, or they can't trust themselves. So it's causing me to echo. You're talking about the 2-week mini cut.
Well, hold on one second. What do you mean by people can't trust themselves?
They can't trust themselves. Whenever, a lot of times, some people like you and I are kind of different because we know what we're doing and we know the little minor things to change. But like what you said, the help is there. Utilize it. Rather than trusting yourself to, because if that's the case, they would, sleep 4 hours, go train, doing a mini cut and increase their training up to 7 days a week, thinking more is better. And,
actually, we had a great question today that someone was like, look, I've done this workout 3 different times. And, now I did it yesterday or today and I'm sore. And I said, well, the things that would affect that would be, under eating. She is currently doing PFFL, under sleeping, and then, stress. I can't remember all of the 3 things, but she said pretty much you nailed all 3 things. I said, well, mystery solved. Now we know why you're sore, right? If you were eating an adequate amount of food, you were fully recovered, and you were relatively stress-free, then of course we don't have those issues. But what I think April is sort of saying that sort of needs to be brought up is everyone wants to buy group coaching for accountability, right? I need to be accountable. That's a little bit of what we do, for sure. I mean, we hold your hand through the process. But what I think has happened in the past is that most people think that failure is like if you're not 100% adherent, that you're ultimately, well, the wheels are off, I'm going to go ahead and, just eat all the cheesecake, right? And what we're saying is, one, you're starting from an adequate amount of calories. Like I said, as 47-year-old guy, relatively active, 2,700 calories. I could go 2,200, 2,000 calories, and while it would suck for a couple weeks, I could deal with it, right? And like I said, you can be a little bit more aggressive on a 2-week cut than you probably would want to be, consistently over kind of a longer period. So April, anything before we move to Gradually Awesome?
I was just going to add, you were talking about the appropriate times. Prime example for a 2-week mini cut, I have a gal in the group coaching who has been eating an adequate amount for a long period of time now, and she's getting ready to go on a trip to Mexico. And she has this awesome new Savage swimsuit. I don't know if you know Savage Swim, but they're these really awesome suits that are designed for muscular bodies. Anyway, so we're doing a 2-week mini cut. One of her strategies is she's going from 5 days to 4 days to allow more recovery days, but she's adding in more NEAT. So she's adding in more low stress activity. You touched on that a little bit. I think that that's very, very important. Adding in the walking, the low stress jogging, things like that on the recovery days, I think is kind of key. But
yeah, I mean, one of the things that happens a lot, is people come out of the holidays and they want to diet, right? Because they want to pay for all the sins from November and December. Here's one problem that exists when that happens is when you're in January and February, I don't care. I mean, unless you live like in Australia or South America or something, where it's the opposite of the way we are in the United States, you're going to be dealing with some level of inclement weather, right? So even like in San Diego, it gets to 50 degrees and everybody in San Diego is like, oh my God, it's freezing. I mean, that's like a heat wave here in Minnesota. But my point being is that in June, you're going to be more outside. You're going to be walking around and you're going to be active. So the time of year that a lot of people are trying to cut isn't necessarily the time of year that makes sense to cut, right? And so when you look at March and April, what's going to be happening in a lot of the northern states? We're going to have the snow melt. You can walk on the paths that, were kind of snowy and icy before. And, naturally your activity level goes up. And so when we're talking about trying to get to an overall deficit, one, I think we need to realize what the advantage of eating an adequate amount of food and then doing resistance training during January and February. That's the cold months, right? So, what we did and what we've been kind of had this big initiative doing the daily challenges, we've been really trying to work on people's volume as it relates to resistant type work, with body weight and to a certain extent, barbell work. But we're really sort of focusing on with these daily challenges in the training and programming group, which, by the way, I think there's only like 3,000 people in it, and I mean, when you look at slot, there should be a lot more people over there, because I think people would benefit from being part of those conversations. I know Sam's putting up a lot of training videos. Chris puts up a lot of stuff over there. I think Crystal's starting to put some things there as well. So, a lot of real cool things are happening as it relates to training. So definitely don't miss out on that. And it's also, by the way, a public group. So if you're looking for, some way to have kind of an introductory way to, become acquainted with Eat to Perform, it's a great way to do that. And you just basically search Eat to Perform Public and you'll be able to find that group. And if you ask for it and you're a nice person, we'll keep you around and you can ask questions and it ends up being awesome. If you're a mean person,
Bye-bye.
You won't like how that goes for you. Just put it to you that way. Anything that we need to say before we move on to Gradually Awesome, because we're definitely not going to be able to cover the wave method, and I will try and cover that on Thursday's show.
No, I think we covered the mini cut. The one thing that I do emphasize on the mini cut is predominantly whole foods. So
yes, and I would say that is when you look at, when I'm cutting, right, my big thing that I change is really kind of oatmeal. I have about 700 calories worth of oatmeal every morning. That'll be the thing that sort of goes away. And so we'll sort of see how that goes. But in general, you don't have to really look at kind of major changes. You just have to think to yourself, well, okay, well, what can I get away with? Now, are my workouts going to be amazing in those 8 weeks? Probably not, and that's what you have to sort of be willing to do, to kind of see a result. But, it's been kind of a year since I've, done like any type of cutting cycle. And I think, if you look at my face, you'll see that I'm still relatively lean. Usually if, in the past, when I would put on weight, usually it would show up in my face quicker than everything. So my volume has really made up for the difference, and I put on a significant amount of muscle in the last year, and I've been able to do a lot more in that process. So I'm pretty excited about it. Not exactly excited about performance-focused fat loss. I will say, well, I'm probably going to give it away a little bit, but I'll just go ahead and mention it. I really am going to try and focus a little bit more on the volume side of things. And so I might not see a ton of weight loss in this scenario, just because of that. I'll be dealing with some fluid in my muscles and things like that, and relative inflammation. I'll probably be sore more often and stuff. So I probably won't see a ton of weight loss because of that, but I think that I'll end up, making my body a little bit more nutrient efficient in that process, and maintaining and then potentially adding tissue in that, in that short period of time. So the other thing that I wanted to kind of mention is what we refer to as a gradually awesome approach. And what's interesting about the gradually awesome approach is it's a great fit for all of the scared people, right? And what happens is a lot of people want to come in and they want to see a result as quickly as possible. It's sort of funny. I mean, it is almost hilarious, actually. We had one gal who had kind of come from like a paleo background, and I remember talking to her in the forums, and I know Chris spent a lot of time with her. And, she was just really genuinely freaked out about, the whole process. And I remember, when Slot first started, she was one of the people that was very, kind of antsy about, kind of jumping in and getting going. And, we sort of walked her through that process. Well, in the course of that year, as she sort of changed her mentality, now she still eats mostly whole foods. I mean, if you want to call that paleo, you go right ahead. But mostly whole foods has been around for a long time, right? Meats and veggies, right? With some added starches, so you're kind of seeing some results as it relates to your workouts. But she went from 20% to 15%. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the female physique, but 20%, is very lean. 15% is like athletic lean. I mean, it's the types of body fat percentages that CrossFit Games athletes have, tennis players have, things of that nature. And so those are the types of things that, you really want to think about. But when we're talking about the gradually awesome, essentially what we're talking about is walking you from a way of under eating to moving your average up slowly, so your weight gain is minimal to the point of possibly losing, right? Because when we're talking about metabolism and we're talking about work capacity, as you start to eat more food, and as you start to hydrate your muscles with carbohydrates, what ends up happening is you have the potential to do more work. Now, when I say potential, what I mean is that's on you, right? We can put the information in front of you, but you sort of have to kind of push yourself. So the way that gradually awesome works is you have kind of your number as it relates to the days that you're working out. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a female and you've been eating roughly 1,300 calories. And we're trying to get you reversed out of that. What we want to do is gradually do that, so you don't see a lot of water gain. A lot of the times we'll talk about, having some of your carbohydrates post-workout, potentially in the morning, because it just loads better at that time. But then you would allow for some of that, carbohydrates basically come with roughly 3 grams to 4 grams of kind of a water tax. So when you start reintroducing carbohydrates to your diet, essentially what's going to happen is you can take the days that you're not working out and then kind of eat at a small deficit for those days, right? And so when you do that, you're allowing your body to process that inflammation or whatever, right? And in that process, your weight is going to stay relatively stable. A lot of people do end up losing weight in that scenario, and the reason why they do is because they kickstart their metabolism. Often we will hear people say, oh my God, I used to never be hungry, and now I'm hungry all the time. That's a good sign. Run with that, right? The other problem that people have with Gradually Awesome is, well, one, they don't lose 30 pounds, but really what Gradually Awesome is great at, is kind of helping people establish a baseline. And then once they do that, then we can start talking about 2-week mini cuts. We can start talking about, wave method. All these things end up being a lot easier when the math is better. The problem that most people have is they want to pull the Band-Aid all off at once, and they never quite get there because they never really allow kind of like their body to work the way that their body wants to work. Now, you're kind of the authority on Gradually Awesome, and I would say that almost every single person has had a lot of interaction with April. And for probably the last 3 years, there was times where, it was like 5 of us, and most people, attribute a lot of their success to April. What would you say in that process, as we've sort of moved from, kind of just Gradually Awesome to having different ways of cutting, where do you think that that's a benefit? And give me some ideas on how you think that works for some people.
I think I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in regards to someone coming from an underfed and they're really, really scared. I think it works very well for that, but also for someone that is more moderately active, who, is busy with life, or, they work and they can only get to the gym 3, maybe 4 days a week. I think it is a perfect fit, perfect for someone like that, that's only moderately active. Now, when you start getting into the realms of very active and you're training 5, 6 days a week, doesn't work so well.
Yeah,
So it still works, but you don't get that balance as well. And that's where I do think that, which obviously someone who's training 5, 6 days a week would probably be a little bit more competitive, with their training and goals and things like that.
there's an interesting thing that you're talking about. I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's an interesting part about what you're saying when people first start Eat to Perform. Firstly, they may or may not have been eating an adequate amount of carbohydrates for what they were doing. So now all of a sudden, they start introducing carbohydrates to the mix. The problem that they run into is if they work out 5 to 6 days a week, they're doing 2-a-days and all this other type of stuff, they're adding in all these carbohydrates, and their body's not quite ready for that yet. On a cellular level, your body takes a while to adjust to this kind of stuff, right? And the other thing that I think is really important as it relates to this discussion is when you are adding more volume because you're adding more food, you are potentially allowing for better absorption into your muscles. I mean, if you look at my arms, well, obviously April's arms right now, if you're watching on YouTube, what you're seeing in both of our scenarios is the volume that we're doing is allowing our muscles to handle those nutrients better. And that's what makes us look muscular and lean. And that does not always correlate to lower weight, but it often does correlate to better, inches off your waist, better aesthetic look, whatever it is that you're sort of looking for as it relates to an athletic goal. Like the reason you work out and the reason why you work hard at the gym is so you have, the potential for an aesthetic that is appealing, right? And so often people will say, that the scale is going up, or they're looking at the scale differently, or I don't look at the scale. I think when you're making major changes to the way that you're eating, the good majority of the time, if you're not looking at the scale, the reason is you don't want to know. That said, I don't look at the scale right now, but probably different than the reason that many of you don't look at the scale. So I don't look at the scale right now because I'm trying to gain weight. And as someone that lost, and when I say gain weight, I really mean gaining lean muscle. But as someone that lost 80 pounds, it can tend to freak me out, to see weight fluctuations that are higher. And in general, it's not a necessary component for me. If I just allow myself, more work volume, more food, in the end, I can deal with, any excessive fat that shows up as a result. But if I, am constantly weighing myself in that process, I'm not going to end up doing the kind of work that's involved. I'll often just get in my head and go, well, is this really important to gain lean mass? Well, it is important to gain lean mass. That's how you increase your metabolism and kind of work from there. The other thing that I want to say when we're talking about any cutting at all, right? When we're talking about cutting and we're coming out of a cutting cycle, I always want to bring this up, and I always will bring this up because it's an important part of the discussion, because it's the thing that most of you have done wrong the whole time. You have to allow for your weight to go up when you're done cutting. And if you're a relatively lean person and you lose 8 pounds, you've got to allow a 3-pound bump back. If you're someone with an excessive amount of fat to use and you lose 20 pounds, you have to allow 5 to 6 pounds bump back, when you start eating relatively normal. Now, what's interesting about that is, let's say that you were a 240-pound female and you lose 20 pounds and you allow yourself 5 to 6 pound bump back. What will happen in that scenario, especially if you're working hard in the gym, is you'll be able to do more work because you weigh 20 pounds less, especially as you start to add in more food. So the 5 or 6 pounds that you allow when you come back, your work capacity can allow you to get that back relatively quickly if you focus on getting the work up higher. People will often ask us, well, what's the numbers as it relates to kind of reversing out of a dieting cycle? And in general, we say anywhere from 50 to 100 calories a week. But that is dramatically affected positively when the athlete uses the acclimation period as a challenge and really makes work volume a thing, right? and work volume in this instance might be, a little extra training as it relates to like a 10K, something like that. Certainly any type of like hypertrophy work, those things would all be favorable. Whenever we're talking about metabolism, just remember the more you do to keep your muscle, typically that's going to be positive for metabolism.
I just wanted to touch on one thing with what you're saying. I see a lot of people, I do agree with, increasing the activity as you start increasing the food. I do see a lot of people coming out of PFFLs who, their calories may have been, quite a bit lower. And the first week that, they start increasing food back, they may have initially been at 2,800 and then they were at 2,200, 2,100, on their PFFL days, on their training days. Well, the first week they bump up, let's go ahead and bump up to 22 consistently for this week. Then all of a sudden they want to add in 2 more training days. 2 more training days. I do think that they need to give a little bit time to, to get the calories up, rather than, you can't just increase your calories by 50 or 100 calories and add in, 2-3 training days. It just doesn't work like that.
And that's why I think that, body fat testing can be a good part of the process for some people. For some people, it can be a little distracting, but in general, if you have kind of a, I'm getting to the point right now. I mean, I haven't body fat tested in probably a year and a half, right? But I'm getting to the point right now where I really would like people to be in like 6-month cycles, just because I think it gets too distracting. I know it does for me, right? Where, I'm trying to focus on, getting an adequate amount of muscle on my frame. And if I start body fat testing and weighing myself all the time and being way too into the details every single day, it distracts me from my end goal. And what I'll often see is, people will, start adding lists and jogging and like April's saying, all this volume without really focusing on sleep cycles, without really focusing on eating more whole foods, without really focusing on what I would consider the baseline. And the reason why those things are important, one of the best gifts that I gave myself as it relates to my fat loss journey was being weight stable when I was sick or hurt, right? And you go, well, why is that important? Well, it's important because you don't want to be digging these gigantic holes, and I would say that that's both ways. If your weight is down 5 to 6 pounds and you're not in a cutting cycle, to me that's an alarm. That's telling me that you're underfed for what you're doing. And if you're not in a cutting cycle, ultimately you're sort of missing the point of, the acclimation or normalization period. And I think, especially with our female clients, they get really happy about that. And I would argue that that ends up being kind of a net negative in terms of like the end game. And the end game ultimately being, lower body fat percentage rather than just low weight. Because when we're talking about low weight, you'll often see runners, right, that can get their weight lower, but they will not necessarily keep muscle in that process, because you can sort of get away sometimes with a little bit less carbohydrates, and then, that water sort of leaving your body, ends up making it seem like you're kind of reaching your goals when in fact, kind of keeping a good amount of muscle on your frame makes a big difference. The last thing that I wanted to say, before we sort of leave, and I'll give April the final word on this. I have a lot of family that's older. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see in human beings, but particularly athletes, is when they start to get into that 55 to 70 range, right? They naturally start losing some athleticism. That's just kind of the way the world works, right? But in that process, they end up being in dieting cycles more. And I'd rather see those folks focusing a little bit more on resistance training. Now, when I say resistance training, am I saying that, my 65-year-old dad should try to, squat 600 pounds? No, but my 65-year-old dad should make air squats a little bit more of a priority, push-ups a little bit more of a priority, and at the end of the day, we're all sort of fighting Father Time, right? And the way that you do that, the way that you have better longevity, is to keep your muscles strong and working. And sometimes that gets a little uncomfortable, especially as we age. We talk to a lot of aging athletes, and they end up being a little bit more sore than our younger athletes. Well, the prescription that we have for them is typically to add a little food, and you'll be able to deal with some of that soreness. Most of the athletes that we work with that are, say, 65 to 70 years old, they don't have the tendons and joint issues that a lot of just regular folks have. You see like a 70-year-old guy getting out of a chair and it's like a fireworks show is going off. You won't see that with a lot of Eat to Perform clients. And the reason why you don't, because one, they're eating an adequate amount for what they're doing. So therefore, their muscles are more useful. And when you have a more useful, strong muscle, it forces your tendons and joints to be stronger as well. When you look at your tendons and joints, it's really connected to kind of like your muscles, and that's how it connects to the bone and stuff like this. So the more resistance that you put on the muscle, the stronger that it's going to make the tendons and joints. Lastly, I just wanted to say that we often trivialize, things like, calcium and glucosamine and all these different types of things. And these things can be useful as it relates to making somebody's, body feel better, or, pains, feel better and healing. But a big part of that healing is also being a little bit uncomfortable with the work that you're doing in the gym. I know the tendency, obviously it's almost it's really a meme at this point, is you have kind of the older people that are, walking through the mall each morning, which is awesome. I'm glad for them that they're still active and kind of doing their thing, right? But they should also be doing air squats. They should also be doing sit-ups. They should also be doing push-ups. And it might sound ridiculous that a 70-year-old person can do that. And I would say that you're wrong. There is no reason that those people can't have athletic pursuits. I work out with people like that every single day, whether it be at my powerlifting gym or whether it be at, the CrossFit gym that I work out with.
There is this older gentleman at my gym. His name is Bill, and he is 86 years old. And some of the younger guys will kind of they won't say anything to him, but they kind of talk about him because he has so much mobility that he will cock his leg up on the standing preacher curl and massage his calves out. And it looks kind of awkward. It really does. But he's 86 years old. He benches. He does all kinds of stuff. And I told them, I was like, can you get your leg up that high to massage your calf out? I don't think so. It's like, give Bill some props. He's 86 years old.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I really I really feel like, I mean, just naturally you lose that zest for life, or at least, I don't know, man. You've met my dad. I mean, he doesn't seem to be losing, kind of his
He,
aggression level, right? But I wish he'd use it, in the gym.
no.
It would pay off well for him.
Also, I wanted to touch on you were talking about the aging, especially with aging females, chronic dieting plays a key role with osteoporosis. And it's a huge, huge thing that females have to worry about, as we get older. So,
Yeah. I mean, when, osteoporosis is fairly simple. Um, you can eat all the calcium in the world, drink all the calcium in the world, but if you don't do some level of resistance training, it doesn't strengthen your bones to a point where you're going to get better. So when you look at bone density through DEXA scan, and I mean, it was so amazing. I think I did 2 DEXA scans, one early on when I started training, and then the other one after a while. And I never thought of it from the standpoint of bone density, and my bone density just went off the charts. And that's the case for everyone, is the more, that you're doing with your muscles, the more it's going to ultimately strengthen your bones, and it's going to actually use that calcium to keep your bones. Otherwise, it just ends up as waste. And so keep that in mind as we're talking about training, because I think that's really important. I think the temptation, I mean, remember when we're talking about Eat to Perform, we're really not talking about like this. I'm so sick and tired, I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody of putting the lion memes out there and stuff like that. But, all that beast mode bullshit, I don't know, man. When I'm like 75, I ain't going to be hearing that. I just want to be like on a beach somewhere, rocking some like calf high, sweatpants, and just kind of doing my thing, But all don't hear what we're saying and thinking we're talking about like, you like making a run at the Olympics or something. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is living a life of abundance where thriving is the priority. And we're trying to give you guys strategies as it relates to times that you would cut, or times that you're looking at a little bit of a deficit, so that you can come out of it with the results that you actually want. So I think that's where we'll end. April, did you want to say goodnight to everybody?
good night, everybody.
All right. And once again, we will go ahead and do the talk on the wave method, which will kind of wrap this all in a bow on Thursday. So we will refer to this one as Fat Loss Chat as well. And just remember that as we're giving you guys this information, we do have a support system in place through the Quick Start forums, through group coaching. So you don't have to be alone in these processes. But if you decide to go it alone, these podcasts will help you. So I appreciate everybody listening, and we'll, try and get that probably Thursday podcast up either Friday or Saturday. So I appreciate everybody being here, and we'll talk to you guys later.